Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we're so fortunate to be joined by Tom Payne, who currently stars in the series Prodigal Son. And the first thing that I was really fascinated by was when you first got cast in this series in season 1, you actually got cast very close to when production was starting. So there wasn't actually very much time for you to do a lot of preparation and kind of like work with the scripts and have conversations with everybody. You really had to learn this character by living in him. And so I was curious about whether going into season 2, you kind of just intrinsically found your character and the involvement that he's having in that same way, or whether there were different things that you wanted to utilize that time before production for.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that has really helped us with the whole COVID situation as well, of coming in and everyone's wearing the masks, and it's quite hard to really grow any kind of relationship with anyone, certainly someone that you've just met. And having had the whole of the first season to establish our roles and who we are, that definitely helped us coming into season 2. Yeah, I did come into the show very quickly, the first season, but Malcolm has a lot of knowledge in his job as a profiler, but a lot of the heart of the show and what makes the show work is the emotional relationships between the family members. And that's, an actor's job is to be in their emotions and how they emotionally relate to everyone else. So it was, that side of it was much more familiar to me. And I had to lean on the director of the pilot quite a lot to help me through it, because it was a bit of a whirlwind. And it's also, if you're working every single day and practically, I think in the pilot I am in every single scene, there's not much chance to catch your breath and figure anything out. You're just kind of going by your instincts and your experience. But I was happy to get through it, and I think it was also when we shot the pilot. When you shoot a pilot, you're shooting a lot of different possibilities. So we shot him as autistic almost. We were trying him in lots of different ways. And so that's why sometimes pilots can seem a little bit patchy, because everyone's just trying to figure it out and trying to figure out what works for the actors, what works for the audience, and how this story can continue and how it can be an ongoing narrative. And so you can't really prepare for it. It's not like preparing for a film where you have a beginning, middle, and an end. And TV show is always like that. But when you're making a pilot, you have an idea of what you think it's going to be, but you have no end product that you're aiming for. You're just aiming for, a successful show that's entertaining. So I couldn't even go, yes, that's who this character is, because we didn't know yet. So that was a whole other challenge. Michael had I'm a serial killer and I've been locked up for years, and my character is just like, well, what is the center of this person, and how can we make a character that the audience are going to want to spend time with? And a lot of the first season of a show is still figuring that out, really. And everyone is, the writers and the editors and the producers are all trying to find the rhythm of the show. And it's only really once you get it in front of an audience and see what they respond to that you can really start to fine tune that. And I think coming back into season 2, we have a much better idea of, we're just starting at a higher level, basically.
Yeah. With that point that you were just making about being able to really kind of fine tune and make certain adjustments, what were some of the things that you really wanted to fine tune and adjust about your character, or possibly evolve based on looking at the reception to the show and how people were responding to him as a character?
Well, in acting in the show, like if I was directing the show or producing the show, then I would have more of an outside perspective on it. I wouldn't want to get too involved in really analyzing it and trying to dial things up or dial them down, because then I think it takes you away from the grounded nature of the character, and everything becomes a bit more artificial. So I would try to steer away from really looking at a character and thinking, oh, maybe I should look in this direction a bit more because that side of my face is better, or maybe it helps when I cry a bit more. I think if any of those kinds of things get involved, then you're not being authentic anymore. So I'm not sure that's helpful. But what I would say is that I think the first season, Malcolm was very much out of control and all over the place. And that melted into me a little bit as well, because it was the first time I'd led a television show and worked these hours and shot 20 episodes of anything, working all the time. So my head was all over the place as well, and then the characters were. So my headspace was a little bit crazy. But coming back into season 2, I mean, that was the situation with the character as well. He had come back to New York, and he was trying to figure everything out again, in the same way that I was trying to figure out my life with the show. And now everything is much more settled. He has spent enough time with his father now that he knows how to cope with that, and how best to look after himself with his relationship with his father and his mother and his sister. And he just feels more settled in who he is now in his life with these people, which I do as well. And coming back into season 2, he starts from that base. But then we've thrown in this other curveball with the murder that happened at the end of the first season. And so then that's a whole other big problem that he needs to deal with going forward.
Yeah. Well, the murder is such a great plot point to be jumping off on for your character. And I was interested particularly in the relationship with Halston Sage, who plays Ainsley, and the way that the two of you have really thought about the shift in dynamic in their relationship, but also just the psychological toll that that's taking on the two of them, because all of a sudden he has to be incredibly different in his demeanor and watch every single thing that he says, every single action that he makes. So it's almost a very different emotional scope for this character, and a different kind of like physical response to people that he's in conversation with. So how have you thought about that in terms of your performance with her, but also just individually in scenes?
Well, I mean, the relationship with Halston and Malcolm and Ainsley just like fitted in. It was I think that was the first day we shot on the pilot, and we were doing this scene in the pilot where we walked down the river, and it just worked. And I think everyone breathed a bit of a sigh of relief that it just, like, the chemistry was there, and it felt like a brother-sister relationship, and from the very beginning. And that was really useful. I mean, it's just amazing when that happens. And then that happened with everyone, actually. Like, they cast it so well, and everyone's dynamics are very true, and they work. So Halston in real life is a bit of a little sister to me, and I don't have a little sister in real life. I have an elder sister. But what I realized yesterday, actually, I had a scene with Halston yesterday, and I realized that, well, I knew this before, but in the show, each character brings out a different side of Malcolm. And Ainsley is really the person that he's most protective of. And she's the only person that he could ever, like, scold or, be angry at. And he can get angry with his dad and emotional with his dad or his mum, but he's still their child. So it comes from a more of a childlike place and a frustrated place. But with his younger sister, in that relationship, he is the elder, and he feels like the elder, and is more protective. And I don't know, that their relationship definitely reflects a different side of him. And when we were doing a scene yesterday, it was really fun for me to be like, oh, I haven't done this before in the show. The scene played out in such a way that I was like, oh, this is a side of Malcolm that we haven't seen, which was really, really nice. And it was an emotion that I had played before, but it came out in a different way with that character, which was a really nice discovery. And that's another reason why I'm very reluctant to analyze too much. And I will always, I know the part so well now, but I love going into scenes just as an open book, really, and seeing where they go. It's hard to do that in TV because you don't necessarily have the time. But I never turn up to set having planned out exactly what I'm going to do, because I think that just limits me. And it does mean that you have a massive time crunch, and you might, it might not be quite as exactly precise, but then I think you lose some of the magic if you want to do that, and you lose some of those little moments which are exciting.
There's also a lot obviously made of the show in terms of how he's really fearful of becoming his dad and taking on any of those traits. But on the same spectrum, he also appears to have a fear of becoming his mother in certain ways as well, played by Bellamy Young. And so I was interested in how you really look to her performance and the way that she inhabits that character, and think about what are the aspects of her that create that fear inside of him.
I think at the moment, a lot of his fears of his mother and her reflection in him is more to do with the stuff that's on the surface, like the alcohol or the pills or any that kind of stuff. And the, I mean, my mother is in a similar way. She's not an alcoholic, but she fixes things with pills. She's like, oh, I take a pill for that. I take a pill for that. And in my life, I don't do that. I try not to do that. But in the show, Malcolm does. He has his regime, and that's what he does. And I think as long as he's not entirely dependent on that, then he feels like he's different to his mother. Like takes things on a reflex, and I think he is more like, okay, I need this to settle me. And he has a routine, and it's less about like, oh, just give me one of those and I'll be okay. It's like, okay, this is keeping me level. But I don't think on an emotional level, he's really plumbed those depths of the similarities between himself and his mother. I think right now that relationship is on more of a surface level because he's so, his gut is so involved with trying to figure out his dad and figure out if this serial killer switch exists within him. But there are absolutely parts of his mother and his character as well, yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the way that you manifest, his sleep terrors and the nightmares that he tends to have, and the psychological toll that really takes on him every single day, because the way that you manifest that in your performance is really well done, even just down to kind of thinking about how that physically affects him as well as emotionally. And so I was curious about the way that you've always thought about how you want to pull that into your performance in a lot of the other scenes, even when we're not addressing it in the moment.
I mean, Malcolm, because this role is like so all-encompassing, and I work on the show every single day, and I do all of these different scenes and all these different things. I'm not necessarily cognizant of how various things bleed into different scenes, but there is definitely some, your body feels it and goes through it. Like if you're crying or screaming or whatever, it has an impact on you as a person, as Tom. Your body feels it, and goes through that. So if you're going through that and waking up in your bed and you're screaming or whatever, and it can't help but bleed into the playing of other scenes. I don't think you can't enter into a scene going, oh, I woke up this morning and I had a nightmare. Because also, what's interesting is showing the audience something and then having him in another scene, and the audience knows that that's what happened to him that morning, but he's not, giving it away. He's not, and that's his whole life, is like trying to hold it together, but all of this stuff is underneath. I played a scene the other day where I went quite big with it. It was a scene of anger, and I said to the director, I was like, it felt right. It totally felt right, but it's quite big. Like I was really angry, and it felt right, but I just want to make sure that we've earned it, and I think we have, because he's just what I was saying last year about the character, and it's the same now, but he has more of a hold on it, is that he's everything all at once for himself. Like he can be crying one minute and shouting the next minute and hugging, he's just this mess of emotions that can express themselves at any time in a bunch of different ways, and that's what makes it fun, and that's what makes it interesting to watch, and a compelling character. And I mean, that's why every time I watch the show, I'm just like, wow, this is so entertaining. It's just like lots of and Michael makes me laugh like practically every episode, and then that's the hook of the show as well, is that like the audience is watching this show where this guy has killed a ton of people, but they really like him, and they want to spend time with him, and like, oh, he's so cuddly, and it's like, this guy is awful, and that's great because that's Malcolm. Malcolm just wants a hug from his dad, but his dad is this awful person, so he shouldn't have a hug from his dad. So the audience is aware of all of the stuff to do with Malcolm and the nightmares and all the things, and that plays in every scene all the time. But you can't start every scene going, well, this morning this happened. It's just an all-encompassing thing that has been happening to him for a long time.
Yeah. I thought it was so interesting as well that Michael Sheen's talked about how the two of you have spent more time together in character than not, because of the way production works and the way that you filmed your scenes together. And it also sounds like when the two of you are working together that you try a lot of different layers and a lot of different angles, because they're very much kind of playing a game and dancing around each other, you know, with wit and with, you know, the emotional games that they're playing with each other as well. How much do you tend to experiment with a lot of different directions that you want to take the scenes together when you're filming them, in terms of just intrinsically finding what feels right?
I think I mean, certainly now we know the characters so well and we know the relationship so well that, I mean, those scenes are stressful and exhausting, but they're a lot of fun because, you know, as an actor, you just want to be in a scene with another actor and play around with it and see where it goes. And that's ultimately what we do. Like, I could sit in that room in silence for an hour and it would be really interesting. Like, you know, the baggage that those characters have going into those scenes is so enormous that you almost have to do nothing, you know, and just see what happens. I mean, it's the perfect actor's exercise. It's kind of a drama school thing of just put these two people in a room together and see what happens. And I mean, a lot of the time, because it's a TV show, we don't have all the time in the world. We have to get through plot points and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, it would be more interesting just for us to sit there and stare at each other for an hour, just because there's so much there, and that's just so fun to play. And yeah, you're right. I actually watched that interview with Michael yesterday where he said that about us spending more time together as characters, and it's very true. But we enjoy it. It's really fun. I not that I want Martin as my father, but it is fun to play.
Also, one of the things that the show does as a whole really well is balance these different tones. You know, you've got the idea that it's a procedural at the same time that it really is this very emotional family drama exploring their lives and you know, very much a character study of Malcolm and who he's become because of all of this. And I was curious about particularly the procedural scenes, you know, because that requires a different type of skill set from you as an actor, a different type of delivery when you're giving them. Do you think about those scenes any differently, even just thinking about like the focus and concentration that he has? Or do you find that it all just bleeds into each other with the different tones for you?
Well, the interesting thing about that is that he is more relaxed and at home at the crime scenes, and that's where he knows that he can focus his mind and not have to think about himself. And yeah, if he has a problem to solve, that's when he's happiest. And then we also, you know, those scenes are funny. Like we have Keiko in those scenes playing Idrissa, who's just always funny, and their little nods and winks to each other, and they're bonding over dead bodies and pulling someone's decapitated head off, and like all this kind of stuff is just so bizarre. But like you said, tonally, the show's all over the map with all the tone, and I'm amazed that we pull it off. Like every time I watch the show, I'm just like, how is this working? How is this hanging together as a show? But it really does, and I think that's the magic of the show, is that it's ultimately it's entertaining, but you can go from laughing one minute to crying the next, and that's testament to the actors that we have on the show as well. Everyone is so good in their roles, and everything is so grounded. Like we can get away with like ridiculous humor because it's all grounded by this intense emotional trauma that the characters are going through. And you need that. Like the audience needs that. The characters need the funny bits, but the audience does as well. I think and that's why it's enjoyable. You know, I don't think that television or film should be always about catharsis, but there is definitely, especially during this time, it's you want to watch something that ticks all the boxes of like, oh, it made me feel this, and then it made me feel that, and then it made me feel this. I think I mean, there's loads of great stuff that's been out there during this time, but I think if you watch something that's just dark right now, it's just a bit too much. You want to watch something that's a bit lighter most of the time, I think, but then to have both in the same package, I think is a good mix right now.
Yeah. And I love that you were just mentioning the rapport between Malcolm and when you're working with Keiko, and the two of you are just kind of getting really excited. And there's that really great scene in this season where you've got the decapitated head and the two of you are having the time of your life, silently just kind of communicating, being like, isn't this great, without saying anything to each other, while everyone else is just going about their work. How do you think about which are the cases and which are the moments that Malcolm is going to get really excited and what's really going to kind of fascinate him in that specific way? Because it's not every single case, but there are those moments where he gets, you know, just hugely excited by what's going on and what he's getting the opportunity to witness.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's excited by most of them, but there's the, you know, it's his job, and some days you have days where you're like, oh, it's just another person who's been murdered or whatever, but he still wants to solve those problems because it helps him function. But the scenes with I mean, it's the gross stuff. We've got a really gross one coming up, episode 3 or 4, and the prosthetics team do such a great job on the show. And I actually forgot what I didn't even think about, like the head that we did in the first episode, because I know what it is, and I was there on set when we filmed it, and I know what's going to happen. I know, but then I've heard from other people like, oh, we weren't expecting her to just pull that person's head off, and there was like a gross thing. I'm like, oh yeah, people didn't know that was going to happen. Like, oh right, yeah, because I did when we were filming it, obviously. But then it's great to have those surprise moments that would repulse anyone else and be like, oh my god, they just did that, and to counterpoint that with Keiko looking at me like, oh my god, and I'm like, it's like, that's super fun. It's really fun to play that, and not to play it as a campy, like, look at what we did moment, but to be really fascinated and excited, and want to. A lot of Malcolm as well is wanting to meet the people who did the thing, because that's ultimately what he's been trying to figure out. Is he wants to meet serial killers to really get to the bottom of why they are how they are and why they do what they do, because ultimately he wants to understand his father and then understand himself, and whether that's going to come out in him.
Yeah. And you were touching earlier on, obviously, when you were filming the pilot, that you were in every single scene, and throughout the show as a whole, you're in almost every single scene and every single sequence, and it's really told from your character's perspective. So how does that impact a lot of the ways in which you work collaboratively with the directors on the show, even just down to thinking about the camera choices that they're making, the blocking of a scene, and how we as the audience are kind of coming into it through your eyes?
Yeah, I do. That is another part of the job now. Because I work all the time, and then we are into a rhythm with the show as well, and I know how scenes generally tend to play out, and I kind of know how we shoot different things now, and it's always fun actually when someone comes in and does something a bit differently. And we take a wall out from one of the rooms, and we haven't done that before, we haven't done that. But no, I definitely am more involved with thinking about those things now, and I have a character to protect now. And sometimes it will be like, oh, I can't do that because I don't want to dishonor the character. That's definitely, that definitely features in it now, whereas I didn't ever think about any of that before. And I'm way more aware of every other department and the intricacies of each person's job, and the amount of work that goes in to everything behind the scenes, and the amount of meetings that happen, the amount of pre-production before you even get on set to film. There are so many meetings, because I considered like, at some point I probably want to direct, and this would be a good thing to start directing on. But actually, I don't know if I could, because I'm someone who really wants to do prep and make sure I'm really prepared. But there's just no way. Like, I couldn't do. You're going out and looking at locations, and then you're looking at set designs, and you're figuring out doing casting, and as the director you're involved in all these things. And to do a good job, I think people have done it on TV, but I don't think I would be satisfied if I did it, because I don't think I'd be able to be as involved as I would want to be. They'd have to do an episode which didn't really have me in it, but then more than that, I would have to not be in the episode before, because before is when you do all the prep. And but no, I definitely have more of an eye for all of the other departments now. Yeah, which is nice.
Yeah. And it's even something where I know that you've talked about how even your day off is already kind of going into preparation for the scenes that you're filming, going back to work on a Monday, and, you know, the hours that you have to pull, and how even when you're not shooting, every single moment is about thinking about this character and kind of preparing and getting ready for it. So how has that really shifted the way that you work as an actor and the way that you approach your craft compared to other projects that you've done before, in just, you know, really having to kind of even mentally be on a different plane with all of this?
Well, I think you're more consumed by the character in general. I think now I've spent a lot more time with him so I can slip in and out a bit easier. Whereas last year was like a melee of feelings and emotions and stuff. Now I'm like, okay, I know who he is, and I can step in and step out easier. But wait, what was the center of that question?
Really about like how it's caused you to shift and change the way that you work and the way that you kind of emotionally think about it as well.
Yeah. Well, it's easier to step in and step out of, and if I've done 20 episodes of it now, so there isn't a huge amount of acting work that I need to do now. It's more about what's the best way to, like, going back to the previous question, like, what's the arc of this story? Where does he start? When I was talking earlier on about, I did this emotional scene the other day, and I was like, oh, I hope that's going to work. And it will work because we know the character and we know the arc of him and stuff. Other shows I've been on, I've been less in control and haven't known really where it was going to go, what they were going to do with me. That was my frustration with being when I was on The Walking Dead, was like, oh, okay, I've got these comic books that I can read. And so I was looking at the comic books and like, oh, he's going to go here and he could do this and do that. And I know that they would change things, but generally they followed storylines. And then none of it really happened. So that was kind of hard for me, because I do like to do my prep and I do want to be the best that I can be. And in this job now, I'm much more involved in, I can pick up the phone and talk to the showrunners and be like, hey, so where do you think we're going to go? And how do we feel about this? And I'm actually never someone who wants to get involved with the creative in a way of, I think this should happen. I might say like, oh, this would be fun, but I'm not, I'm protective of the character, but I would never dictate what would happen to the character. I'm not, I'm an actor for hire. I come in and play the part. I'm not someone who tells someone how to write the part. I just do my job the best that I can do it, and expect that the writers then see what I'm doing and write to that and make the show the best that it can be. Also, if I start to look at everything else, it's just, this is going to make my head explode, because there's so much to think about. I don't even read the scripts. I read the first draft that comes through, but then by the time we shoot an episode, it'll have gone through a bunch of different drafts, and lots of things will have changed. And when that's happening, that script's coming in, I'm shooting another episode. So first of all, I don't want the next episode in my head, but I also don't want these other things that aren't even going to end up being in the final script in my head. So for me to be involved in all of that process would just be way too confusing. And sometimes this season we've been shooting 2 episodes at the same time sometimes, so that's really confusing as well. Like episodes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 we shot at the same time, and 3 and 4 we shot at the same time, and I couldn't tell you which scenes are in which episode. So it's really hard to do interviews sometimes, because I don't know. Episode 1 this season, I was like, when I watched it, I couldn't believe that there was so much in that episode, because we shot 1 and 2 at the same time. I was like, oh wow, that happened in that episode, and that happened, and that happened. Because to me, everything happened at once, so it was all just one big melee. Yeah, I just try to do my job the best that I can.
I also thought it was really interesting that you've mentioned a couple of times before how you feel like a few years ago maybe wouldn't have been the right time for you to take on a role like this and to be the lead of a show in the way that you are now. What are the tools and skills that you feel you wanted to and had the opportunity to really develop and enhance in those years that have helped you to take on this position as the lead in the show?
I think recognizing there's a lot of growing up stuff, like real life stuff, like recognizing the amount of self-care that is necessary, managing your time. Like these are really just grown-up adult things that as an actor, generally you're very lucky if you get into the position of being lead actor. And most actors come in and spend a couple of weeks on something, or even if you're a regular, like I was in Walking Dead, you shoot a couple of days an episode, a few days an episode, and most of the time when I was in my 20s, I spent most of my time in the pub. Like I didn't, and then you go and film something, and then you go to the pub and talk to your actor mates about that thing you filmed, and oh god, and that guy's got that job over me, and I'm just gonna have another bit. So that's a lot of it. And then when you get into a position of responsibility, because you're not really, like, actors don't really have much responsibility. Like, you turn up, you get to dress up as another person and mess around. But then once you are, like, this is the most responsibility I've ever had in my life. Like, if I don't go to work, 250 people don't get paid. Like, it's a lot of pressure. And I think I would have crumbled under that earlier on in my career, or actually I wouldn't have realized that part of it. I wouldn't have realized quite how important it was that I came to work, so that everyone, and that I came out of my I get very frustrated when I hear about bad behavior from actors, because I just don't really understand it. And I think, it's not a hard job. Like, it's emotional, and like, we go through things, but that's what you're paid for, and just do it. Like, don't be difficult. Everyone else has a family. They're not getting paid as much as you probably, and like, just shut up and just do the job. I also enjoy bringing that attitude to set and being that actor who is like, come on guys, let's do this, and let's go to work, and I'm so excited, and the smile on my face puts a smile on your face, and I really enjoy that side of it. But the first big lead I did a movie when I was 29, and about midway through that movie, or 2/3 of the way through that movie, I kind of collapsed under the pressure of everything. I just don't think when you're younger you're mentally strong enough to work 16-hour days and have the stress of all of that. It's just an age thing, I think. But also then The Walking Dead actually really prepared me for the whole fame side of it and all that kind of stuff. And that kind of thing can go to your head as well in your 20s, but came to me at the right time, and I was part of this massive thing, but I wasn't the lead and I wasn't the center of it. So I could kind of sit back and observe it, and it was mad and fun, but definitely showed me a lot of things about the industry, and massively prepared me for this now. So no, I'm really honored to be where I am, and to be leading a cast, and to be that person. And I do feel the pressure, but I don't know, it just kind of figured out at the right time for me, and it was just like, yeah, this is where I'm supposed to be. So yeah, feel good.
And it's also such a great opportunity to really just like exercise that muscle that is acting, because it really is this muscle, and the more that you spend time with it and the more you inhabit it, and even just the way that you talk about playing this character and how you don't have to think about certain things anymore because you just know instinctively what that is. What are the ways in which you feel you've really just kind of enhanced the way that lives in your body and the places that you're able to go more easily as an actor?
What are the things that enable me to do that?
What are the skills that you feel like you've just like enhanced from that, and the places that you feel like you can just find much more easily from the time that you've been able to spend doing this?
When I was a younger actor, I had, like, I think a lot of people do, they have this kind of, I mean, in your 20s, you're a bit wayward anyway, emotionally, and you're just trying to figure everything out. And I definitely had that fear of like, well, but what if I lose that? Like, what if I actually figure my personal shit out, and then that destroys my acting? Of course, that's complete nonsense. Like, if the reality is the more wayward you are in your life, the less controlled you are on screen. And that's fun to watch, but what it means is there's no precision, and there's nothing holding you in. So you can be all over the place, and that's great, but it only goes so far. Especially with this part, because I've played now pretty much every emotion under the sun with this part. You now have to look at the levels of that and go, well, I don't want to cry again in this scene. Like, I don't think he should cry again, or I don't, or if you feel like crying, then you just hold it more. Or there's all of these just different levels. That movie that I spoke about earlier on when I was 29, I did with the actor Stellan Skarsgård, and we had a scene where I was saying goodbye to him, and it was, you know, supposed to be like this big emotional scene. Like he was like a father figure in my life in the movie, and I'm leaving him. And when we shot his side of it, I was like streaming with tears. And then we turned around on me. And because of the way that we were shooting, we also had to turn, we were on a wagon and we had to turn it around. So we were physically in a completely different situation. So the scene didn't feel the same. And I just didn't feel it at all. And so, and you can tell, and he could tell, that I was trying to cry. And it's just not, you know, you could see that I was forcing it. And he told me, you know, he's like, you don't have to cry. Like the audience will, you know, be in the moment and see you and understand what's going on, and you can like fake it a little bit, but you don't have to actually be crying. And at the time, I was like, I understood what he was saying, but I was like, yeah, but I do. Like, this is a moment where I should be crying. But actually, the story does a lot of the work for you, and you don't have to perform. You don't have to show the audience. You don't have to hold their hand the whole time. And actually, if you don't cry, they'll cry for you a lot of the time. And Malcolm is so, I mean, I don't have to do much, actually. Like, and I have done a lot, and we have had scenes of crying and scenes of all of these different things, but there's so much there all the time that actually, I did a scene yesterday with one of the other characters, and all I did was look at them, and they lost their lines because I made them cry. And I wasn't even crying. It was just the scene and just the way that I looked at that person, because they also know the character and where he's coming from and the situation that we were in. And now it's really fun because I don't have to do as much. But then when I do like a big shouty scene or a big crying scene, then it has a different kind of an impact. Which is fun. So I guess I've learned a lot about levels, and you're right, like you only learn by doing, and it's really hard being an actor because you don't get to do it as much as you want to do it. And that's the only way you can get better. So it is hard to work on it. And even if you go to classes, it's a very different feel to being on set and all of the things that come with that.
Yeah. Well, it's so delightful watching you in the show, and thank you so much for taking time to talk to us all about it today.
Thank you. Sorry, I rambled on quite a lot.